morning, Dr. Rosensweet.
Good morning, Carolyn.
It's good to see you. I hope you had a wonderful weekend, a good rest, and that you're ready for the day.
Weekend. I'm ready.
All right. Well, so am I. So let's get to it because we chat. You know what? I'm not seeing comments here on the right-hand side. That if Andre's still around, maybe I will. Anyway, let's get started. Okie dokie, I've got a bunch of questions here, Dr. Rosensweet. And again, always thank you for being here. My first question comes from Hortense, and this is something that I've experienced quite a bit, and it's a good one. I think a lot of women feel this. Question is, I feel great in the afternoon, and by the time that it is dark, I feel like myself, but when the mornings come, I just can't cope. Why?
When the mornings come, can you elaborate on that? She feels great in the afternoon, and the evenings are fine. Did I hear that properly, or?
Yeah, she's feeling well in the afternoon, and as the nighttime comes, she's feeling much more like herself. And then when she wakes up in the morning, she's, I believe, having quite a bit of anxiety and can't cope.
So she's saying anxiety.
Yeah, I'm saying anxiety. Knowing her, I believe that that's what she means.
All righty. NMI, or not enough information. NEI?
Yes, NEI I get.
Wake up in the morning and not feeling well is, this would be the kind of situation where we would ferret out the details in any kind of medical consultation, because there's so many different things that this could relate to. I am going to deal with the information I do have. And, I don't know her age. I don't know her menopausal status or hormone status, anything like that. But one thing is, when someone wakes up during the morning and is tired and doesn't feel good and feels awful, one of the first things I think of is, do they have adequate thyroid hormone? And I'm not talking about, quote, normal thyroid testing, end quote. These ranges are way too broad. I'm talking about the kind of criteria that you apply to 4 thyroid blood tests. Number 1, TSH. Number 2, free T3. Number 3, free T4. And number 4, reverse T3. So one thing she could do, is she could put a thermometer by her bedside and shake it down the night before. Maybe it's digital. And when she wakes up in the morning before she goes to the bathroom, she could stick that thermometer into her armpit and register that temperature. And if it's below 94, I'm sorry, I've the actual number slipping my mind. It might be a little higher than that. Register that number. And because someone who has low thyroid has low temperature and other symptoms. Now, I'm going out on a limb here. There are so many things that someone could wake up in the morning and not feel good, but as the day wore on, she can feel better. Why I thought of thyroid is that's a common symptom, because thyroid, by the time you get your circulation going during the day and you've been active, you get enough energy from other sources. The thyroid isn't so important. So, wild guess. I don't like to make wild guesses. Not enough information, but at any rate, there's some thoughts for people who are waking up tired in the morning with a lousy mood. There's a lot of other causes, but I would need so much more information.
Well, it could be low mood. My feeling, just from a lot of the women.
Let's not guess. This is part of the. Let's just deal with what we have. I don't know what she's saying, so let's not guess about it. I don't think it's.
Can I ask you this question? Do you think that that, like, when we wake up in the morning, cortisol is important because it wakes us up? Is it possible that there can be an overabundance of cortisol, maybe, that could cause anxiety or adrenaline?
Well,
That's
Again, I would need to know age. By the time women have entered into their 40s and certainly their 50s, so many have overtaxed, and this is men too, the adrenal glands where the cortisol is being produced, that I don't see, and you've seen hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of tests on women. I don't commonly see elevated levels of cortisol. Au contraire. Au contraire. We usually see, and I really like 24-hour urines for this, we usually see depleted corticosteroids.
Oh, interesting.
And so I'm not gonna say that she's got a high cortisol in the morning. Not impossible. High adrenaline, well, yes, that's within the realm of possibility, and even menopause can account for some of that because, for example, it's common during the night if the estrogen low to trigger the biology, the stress response, because a woman's body does not like low estrogen. So what does she do? She has a vasomotor goodie called a hot flash, which she may or may not feel if she's sleeping, but that's stressful. And the accoutrement of the hot flash is the fight or flight biology, which includes adrenaline. Can adrenaline get you jittery and racy? And oh yeah, but the thing I'm not really comfortable with as we answer this is that here we are talking about a single person, and I don't know enough about her, so I'd like to move on to the next question, actually.
Okay, well, thank you for answering that in a nice, vague, general way. Okie dokie. This one, Brooke asks, if a person is having a hard time with a low dose of a hormone, let's say progesterone, should she, quote unquote, flood the gates with that hormone and increase it rapidly? She says she's confused. If we're at a good balance, will this change things up with progesterone if we add more and more and more? Many women do say, well, this is a second question to that. Many women do say to first get your estrogen up to optimal levels before you add in progesterone so that you can handle that progesterone.
Yet another amazingly simple question that is deep and broad and wide and a lot to it. And here's how I interpret this. We have a single woman trying to figure out her hormones. And I get a little heartsick when I think about that.
Aww.
Because this shouldn't have to be the case.
Right.
It should be so easy for a woman to access a healthcare professional who really knows what they're doing and get these things right. And I'm going that far because, just for example, I was a trained medical doctor, a physician for 25 years before I met up with my first menopausal patient.
Right.
And now I've been treating menopause for over 25 years. Don't do the math. Why? I'm not ageist. I like my age. Excuse me.
I like your age too, and mine.
And my point is this, that once I started treating women in menopause, it took me about 10 years to get good. There's so many moving parts, and these hormones are so powerful. And each woman is so individual. And that's really how I cut my menopausal education, really, was woman by woman by woman by woman, figuring it out. And I must say, I was so grateful that I had the great, amazing tool called the 24-hour urine hormone test, which is why you're talking to me today. You wouldn't want to talk to me if I hadn't done all that testing. You'd want to go find someone who knew something else, right? Well, I had that tool for 25 years. And so I could correlate with what a woman was discovering internally from the suggestions we'd make to help her find her optimal hormonal balance by adjusting estrogen in the form of biest, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA, if not to mention thyroid. And so, yeah, 10 years. And then I spend 80% of my time training and mentoring doctors and nurse practitioners and prescribing pharmacists. And it takes them, with all the background they have and all the education that we give them, it takes them 50 patients or 100 patients before they start feeling out of the woods and going, wow, I'm getting this. So I'm not here to discourage you, but I want to reinforce a message that I've been saying lately is a woman in menopause's main job, this is your job from my perspective, is to find someone you really like and trust. Like, and I've used this example before. And when I mean someone who's a healthcare professional who studied this, who's specializing in this. We used to be perfectly happy training medical doctors and nurse practitioners to do this work and just expose them to our training program, the menopause method. We don't do that anymore.
Right.
We are mentoring and training healthcare providers that want to specialize in this, because we realize that even these amazingly trained and experienced, clinically experienced physicians and nurse practitioners, if they don't specialize in it, they just don't get good enough to be able to do what the women want. Women want to go to somebody who knows what they're doing and have them do a good job. And take them eloquently and elegantly and swiftly into getting the hormone balance and dosages properly and dealing with all the moving parts that relate to menopause and hormones. The good news is that complexity is the doorway to a lifetime of just amazing things, a restoration and getting you back into your life. And most important, the long-term, 10, 20, 30, 40 years of important health issues like bones and muscles and brain and arteries and vagina and bladder and libido and energy. These are profoundly wonderful and complex medical subjects. And so you want to work with someone this is our home turf. This is what we do. This is where we spent so much time and energy, and we pretty much figured it out. That's who you want to go to.
That's why I call it menopause land, because it is menopause land.
And sometimes women do a few adjustments. They get their hands on some over-the-counter progesterone, especially in the perimenopause. They do some good. I encourage that. Progesterone, it's hard to make a mistake with progesterone, especially in the perimenopause. Oh my God. But as you start getting to estrogen, and then you're going to need testosterone and DHEA. There is no exception to that. They're extremely important, especially for the long haul. You're dealing, well, here's what I did. And I'm going to tell the story again. I know many of you have heard this. When I was a young man, I was fascinated with automobiles. I was born in Detroit. That's my credential. And I rebuilt my first engine when I was 29, because I was fascinating. I like to work on my own cars, and I like to tune them up. And I went so far as to rebuild an engine. And by God, I did it. I rebuilt that Corvan engine.
Right.
And it actually drove 7,000 miles before the whole thing froze, and that was the end of it. It became a playground fixture for preschool in Santa Fe. And then I had a Volkswagen van, and that engine needed rebuilding. And this time I took it to an expert, and he was the kind of mechanic that let me observe him while he was doing it. And when I watched and saw the details, every step along the way that he did that I did not do, I went, oh, that's why my engine froze. When you're dealing with technical, no matter what it is, you want to become an artist, it's great to have some mentoring and some teaching. And it's going to great on your 1,000th artwork, you're going to be a much different artist than when you started off. It's anything and everything. A musician, they put in 10,000 hours. An athlete, these people don't get good. And so this is who you want to go to. This is a big enough and important enough subject. I'll get off my soapbox. Thank you,
Well,
Carolyn.
no, I mean, it makes me, I think of Daryl, because he lived literally for 20 years in recording studios. He slept there underneath the board. There are no overnight successes. We think there are, but there aren't. And then when we get into menopause, I think that, well, some women are very, very lucky and they go to their doctor, they're given this, that, and they just go on their way and they're like, what? I look at women like that. I was like, what do you mean, what? Like, I can't relate to you. We can't talk. I did
That is true, and I appreciate that. That happens every so often. And that's fantastic. And, you know, may it happen to everyone, but it's not that common in my world. It's like in the menopause method, we tell patients that become members, we say, in the first 4 months, we're going to be putting in 6 to 16 hours, many consultations, many tweaks and adjustments and testing and readjustments to get you in the zone. It'll last you a lifetime. We'll retest you and consult with you every year, annually, but you want to be in the proper zone that protects your bones and your arteries and your brain. And I won't repeat that list, but we know what that zone is. And we don't want to give you too much. We don't want to give you too little. And we know how to test you to know it's too much and too little. So, yeah.
So then, really, I can answer. I don't know. You know, she's saying, you know, like, should I flood the gates?
Well, I'm very queasy around the word flood.
I know, right?
And flood can happen. And no, it's a gradual process. You start low and you gradually increase. And, you know, by the time a woman's in menopause, her receptor sites have if she hasn't been treated, a lot of her receptor sites have gone dormant. You do not want to flood these receptor sites. You want to give them just the right amount so they can gradually wake up in the springtime of early menopause, when the little buds are just starting to open up. You don't want to flood these little delicate things. You want to do it slowly and slowly and at the proper rate. It's tempting, and you can gradually increase. I mean, if this caller has over-the-counter progesterone, you're safe. You know, do what you want. You're safe. You're not going to get it high enough with the over-the-counter stuff.
Okay. I want to. This is so sweet. Rod says your book is supposed to be delivered today. Woo woo. So she's excited about that, and I want to welcome Lily too. And I'll ask that question in a second that you're asking. So Lisa asks, from your book, we learn that we want, and it kind of piggybacks on that, we learn that we want the lowest dose possible to protect brain and everything that you just said, et cetera, and I've asked you this a zillion times, and my doctor too, that you referred me to, who I adore. Is there an actual amount, like a number that we're looking for to get to?
I can't imagine myself using the term, we want the lowest dose. I never recall having said that.
No, and it's in quotes. So
yes, the dose that we're looking for is the optimal dose.
Right.
And that varies woman to woman, and it's based on many moving parts. So it's why we individualize this whole process, because each woman, and each man for that matter, but we're talking about women in menopause here, each woman varies widely, woman to woman, on how sensitive you are to anything that you take into your body, how much you need of any one given thing, how well you absorb anything, what the response is to any given, let's say, hormone that you particularly have, what configuration of symptoms are appearing in you that need addressing, that's different woman to woman. And I've just named 4 things there, or maybe 5. There are many more moving parts. No worries. We don't care about it a whit. How we do this is we start with each individual woman, and we work with the individual hormones, and we individualize and find your optimal dose for each one of those things.
So optimal is the optimal word.
Yeah, and it's the sweet spot. It's like, I don't know if anyone's ever played tennis. You can hit the ball in that tennis racket anywhere from the wood or anywhere, but man, when you hit a certain spot in that tennis racket, it just feels so fantastic. It's the right spot for the optimal return of the tennis ball. And, you know, it's a funny analogy, but that's really what we're looking for.
No, it's a good, I was on a tennis team in high school. We won, and I know that feeling. It's like, bam. Yeah.
Or any endeavor that anyone is doing, cooking a meal, you know, when you hit the sweet spot, and you know when you're a little off.
Yeah.
You even know when you're a lot off.
Your guests,
no matter what the profession, musicians, boy, they sit there and they know when they've landed in the sweet spot, or were they a little off, or were they a lot off, and they don't even have a take. Actors, actresses, you name it, any profession, plumbers, you know, when you tighten that pipe and you got it right, and you didn't rip the thing off the wall because you went too hard, or not get it tight enough so you got a leak. Every single profession that there is, you know when you clean the house and the house is, you really did it. Or you know when you fell shy and it was sloppy around the edges. Well, there's the optimal amount. Now, you asked for numbers.
Correct.
And you know there are numbers, but the numbers are ranges. They're like, for example, on a 24-hour urine hormone test, we know the number that's the low end. We don't want to dip below the number 8 for the sum of estradiol and estrone, the total potent estrogens in the urine, because when we do, medical research shows us, and my 25 years of experience confirms that a woman who doesn't have enough of those estradiol and estrone estradiol and estrone in her urine, she's going to get vaginal atrophy, and she's going to have bone loss. Just for a couple things. Dip below that, you got all kinds of problems that you're vulnerable to. And at the other end of the numbers, these numbers aren't going to make much sense to you unless you're, really taking the subject on. At the upper number, for example, is 14 microns of the sum of estradiol and estrone, the potent estrogens. You don't want to go above that number in most all cases, because at that point, you put a woman's breasts at risk for breast glandular cell proliferation, for mitosis. Mitosis in a young woman that occurs every month, breast glandular cell proliferation and preparation for possible lactation, is a good thing.
Yes.
But in a menopausal woman, we don't need mitosis of breast glandular cells in a 50-year-old woman at all. And so there are numbers, and we know it. For all the hormones, we know those numbers, and it's an optimal zone. And we get there to those numbers by starting you on low doses and alleviating your symptoms of hormonal insufficiency, like hot flashes, night sweats, while falling shy of or backing down from symptoms of hormonal excess, overstimulation of excessive estrogen. It's going to lead to breast tenderness. It's going to lead to overstimulation of breast glandular tissue and breast tenderness of not pain. We work with the clinical symptoms, but that's not the final answer. Women who land in their symptom-free zone, in their symptom optimal zone, we still need to test you. And here's what we learned. That women who say, hey, I feel better. I feel good. I must have found my right doses. What we learned is 50% of those women are not on dosage that is sufficient to protect the bones in the vagina. And if you're not protecting the bones in the vagina, look out brain and look out arteries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Of women who say, hey, I feel good, they're on dosages that put them at risk for breast glandular cell proliferation. So that's 75% of women who say, hey, I've titrated my doses, I feel good. 75% of you have not landed in the sweet zone, the sweet spot, whatever you want to call it, the optimal zone. So it's not hard, especially when you've seen 100 or 1,000 patients. It's
right. And I mean, like you bring up so many good things that I could go on and on about, but you named like 5 things. And if you have a doctor that has an incredibly busy practice that deals with all sorts of things, those 5 things alone can take up, 2 hours. That it just isn't possible. So I'm with you 100%. Menopause is a specialty. You want to get with somebody good and who knows what he or she is doing. And then you can work with that person to reach those optimal zones and numbers and so on and so forth. Yeah?
And to take what you said one step further, it's still the Wild West in the world of menopause and prescribers. This massive thing took place in menopause that just didn't take place in any other branch of medicine that I know of. In the 90s, the 1990s, and the early 2000s, the bodies of knowledge were getting so great for internal medicine, for cardiology, for hearts, for the heart, for the gut, for the brain, that we started seeing massive specializations start occurring to where you get cardiologists, gastroenterologists, neurologists. They were always there. But my God, the knowledge base and the tools available, it came to an era where we had to specialize. Well, why not menopause? Because in 2002, the very time that these specialties were really consolidating and really expanding in the medical world, the Women's Health Initiative study came out and scared the what off of women all over the world
and doctors.
And so people shied away from it. And there's very few of us who decided, hey, look, we looked at the literature. Turns out that the risk is less for women being treated. And we just marched right ahead. But there's not many of us. So it's not an easy field to go out there and get an expert, although you know that we are. And you become a member of the menopause method and you will get that. And Carolyn, if I may take a liberty here, I see Krishna. One of our new members has come on. Hi, Krishna.
Well, hi, Krishna, and hi, Elizabeth, and hi, Dion as well. So, yeah.
Would you read Krishna's question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Would you read it?
I will. Krishna is saying, hi, Doc and Carolyn. 2 weeks on the menopause method, and it's going great. More detailed questions. For vaginal discomfort with intercourse, should I look for organic oil formulated vaginal biased cream or go with pharmaceutical estradiol estrase? And your book said even with this, it could take 160 days. Boy, I can answer that one, but you can go ahead, Dr. R. You're the pro.
There's several ways to look at this. I mean, a lot of women who've entered menopause know the issue. They're getting dry vagina, they're getting itchy urethral meatus, which is the opening of the bladder. And if they're having intercourse, their lives changed. Instead of lubricating themselves, they started to use external lubricants. If they're having intercourse, they started having pain on intercourse. And this is 100% predictable outcome, almost 100%. There are exceptions. I must say there are exceptions. But most women who don't have estrogen get vaginal atrophy. So it's not just a dryness, it's an actual change in the tissue. And it's something that matters greatly. Having a healthy vagina pretty much ensures that you're going to also have healthy bones. So we use a healthy vagina as a marker to know that we're probably in the ballpark of getting healthy bones and thus arteries and other things, and not everything. But it's a really bottom line. You must have a decently healthy vagina in order to know that you're getting protection of the bones and other organs, most of them. Now, for women who are not having active intercourse and you started on estrogen, the estrogen that you're applying to your forearms, for your example, and are rubbing in, eventually that's going to replete your total body estrogen to a level that will heal that vagina. And you can count on that systemic absorption of the bias that you're applying to your arms to eventually take over there. But that's not the only approach to this. And I would, yes, in the old days, I used to use these creams. I've never used estrase. My preferred if you want to help the vagina early on, my preferred is estriol. It's one of the 3 estrogens, and it's the one in pregnancy that really has a lot to do with the health of the vagina. So for 25, 30 years, there's been these products produced by compounding bioidenticals, compounding pharmacists that compound estriol in these vaginal creams and gels. And my favorite used to be a vaginal cream of estriol, a vaginal gel of estriol, and a non-astringent base, because these usual bases are solvents and they're irritating. So you got to have a special preparation for vagina. But these days, you know, I love the organic oils, and we suggest to women to do anything from taking the bias, an extra drop on their fingertip and apply it in their vagina. But for women who are having active intercourse, we recommend, and Krishna, you have a wonderful doctor who knows all about this. You and I have recently talked about this. We get you an extra bottle now these days of estriol in our organic oil base, and you apply a drop or 2 every night when you go to bed intravaginally. And it doesn't take that very long when you're doing that extra added vaginal. You know, it could take a month or 2. It depends how far along the atrophy has gotten. Sometimes the atrophy responds within a month or 2. Sometimes it takes 3 to 6 months, even 9 months for the atrophy to really improve. In the interim, if you're having intercourse, I highly recommend organic coconut oil as the lubricant. So get an extra bottle, have your doctor prescribe, she knows all about it, an extra bottle of estriol. And other things have been used with the estriol. You could use estradiol in there. That's why you could use your Biest in there. You could also use a combination that includes testosterone. You could also use a combination that includes DHEA, but they're usually not necessary. I say extra bottle of vaginal estriol if you really want to accelerate the vaginal healing process, and organic coconut oil if you're having active intercourse. And that's how I do it.
Well, you do it well. That vaginal atrophy, boy, did me in. Oy, 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 oy. And you know the faces I can make behind that one. Not fun. But the good news is that it can get better. It can get better.
It can get better, and it matters greatly that it gets better. It's one of the clinical markers we use, like I was saying at the beginning of my response, that if your vagina is returning to health, you're approaching the level of hormones that your bones are going to be protected. And if your bones are protected, in most women, that's going to be protective to your coronary arteries. And a lot of women, that's going to be protective to your brain. There are some women that need extra doses of estrogen to really protect their cognition and brain. And that's a whole story of special expertise that I won't go into right now.
Got it. Lily asked a question, and Lily T, and I can't seem to get it. I don't know if you're seeing it. I believe it had to do with progesterone, and are you seeing it, Dr. R?
I'm going to scroll up and see if I can see Lily. Yes, I do. Here's your question. It's the very first one. Can low progesterone cause PTSD?
Thank you.
Panic attacks, fatigue, and anxiety during the luteal phase if you're not menopausal? Yes, and yes, and oh yes, yes, yes. That is the answer. Yes, it sure can. Progesterone is the great calming hormone. Almost every other hormone that you can name, with the possible exception of melatonin, is activating, energizing, even recruited for fight or flight. Not progesterone. It's the great calmer. And many, many women really have a firsthand experience of this when they're pregnant, when their progesterone levels are just astronomical and compared to non-pregnancy. And they have moments or hours or times of being so calm, you'd think they had a spiritual awakening or something. It's from the progesterone. Progesterone is so calming that were we to inject the right dose of progesterone intravenously, I'm not recommending this, especially since it's an oil. It's not water soluble. But were we to inject intravenously the proper dose of progesterone into any woman or any man or anybody, we could be put to sleep so deep that surgery could be performed on us. Calming. And here's something about women and progesterone. It is so common for progesterone to start declining in a woman's 30s or 40s.
Right.
And all hormones peak when a woman is 20. That's when she's got her highest level of hormones, plus or minus a couple of years. All hormones start declining from that point on. And one thing about progesterone, it can decline more rapidly and deeper than estrogen. And when it does, this is when the symptoms come. And this is why I like over-the-counter progesterone. I mean, there's more elegant ways to do it, but a woman in perimenopause, you can pretty much count on doing a trial. If you're getting a little anxious, because that would be the symptom you would get. You would get anxious instead when you don't have the major calming hormone present in your body. And other things that calm you, some neurotransmitters that calm you. But if you don't have the major calming hormone, you get not calm, which is otherwise known as anxious. And so you want that calmer. So use that as a clue, Lily, and certainly try it out. My God. And it's so good for you. You should. Here's how I'm here today because 25 years ago, and I've told this story, and I pardon me if it's repetitive to many of you. 25 years ago, a patient that I knew for many years was in her mid-40s. She came storming into my office before the practice day began. I was at my desk getting some things done, and she pounded her fist on my desk, and she was so upset. And she said, "I'm going crazy," which was very remarkable because this was one of the most brilliant women I had met to that time. She'd retired in her mid-40s. Think about that. What does it take for someone to do so well in business that they retire in their mid-40s?
Well, and you had known her.
Well, yeah, she was a patient of mine for other minor holistic reasons.
Right.
And I had serendipitously spoken to a world expert on progesterone, John Lee, a medical doctor in Sebastopol, California. And he had extolled the virtues of progesterone. And I went, "Oh, okay. Here, Deborah, try some progesterone." 3 weeks later, I get this call back from her. She said, "I can't believe this stuff. I'm totally myself again. And I'm here today because that was so inspiring to me to see that dramatic a result in a patient from a hormone."
Right. And that kind of got you on your way.
It did. And I wasn't actually steering my career. That's done by the divine. But hey, progesterone, try it out, Lily. There's no loss. Almost every woman's low in progesterone, and it's so safe. You're not going to take too much because too much progesterone is going to get you groggy. It's going to get you too calm. This is why we usually suggest for women to apply it at night only, but some women apply it during the day for its anti-anxiety effect. But you don't want to take too much because you get too groggy. You don't want to drive a car. You don't want to operate a crane. You don't want to fly an airplane. You don't want to go into a spaceship. I want to list all the things that it's important to do when not overdose yourself.
Do not operate dangerous machinery.
Yes, that's what I was including in it.
Like a spaceship.
Yeah, don't go into your spaceship and plan to launch it on the day that you've taken an overdose of progesterone.
Not a good idea.
Have someone else drive it.
Yeah, absolutely. A designated spaceship driver. We have a lot of questions here. Oh my God, and I didn't even get to the other. So we didn't forget that. We have a thank you. I have from Valerie, does estrogen replenish help regenerate bones or just stop degeneration?
Well, there's a lot of moving parts to bones. And at the vanguard of trying to restore them or at least stop it is estrogen. And I can tell you this, we see women who've had osteoporosis. Now we do several things. I would hold estrogen to be the most important of what we do, but we also do progesterone. That promotes the laying down of new bone. You can't name me one other biochemical in the world that does that, stimulates the laying down of new bone. We do testosterone, that relates to bone, DHEA, thyroid. We look at digestion and absorption, the things that bone are made out of, because bone, interestingly enough, is a very active metabolizing thing. It gets replenished every 7 years. It's a slow replenishing rate, whereas the red blood cells get replenished every 2 to 3 days. The bone still has an active metabolism. That means it's recoverable. So there isn't a woman that we work with that we don't address all those things at once. Here's another factoid related to this. A woman who has had the good fortune of going on to ovarian hormones early on in her menopausal life and stays on them, almost always she has bone protection and she doesn't get into osteopenia or osteoporosis. But should she stop those hormones, let's say when she's 85, for no reason at all, there would be no reason to stop them at all. Oh, that's a subject. Just dropped a little factoid right there. No reason to get off of them at all. If she stopped them at 85, very rapidly she's going to go into bone loss.
Ooh. And in comes the hip fracture, etc., etc.
All kinds of fractures possible, because simultaneously you've also lost your muscle strength and you can fall easily, etc. But the moral of the story is, yes, estrogen matters so much for bone, but don't leave out all the rest of the stuff. There's not the only thing that relates to bone.
Yeah, I was having that discussion this morning about all four. Yeah, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, and then you went on to mention the thyroids and so on and so forth. Because God, this goes so fast. It's crazy. I do have a question here I wanted to ask about yeast infections. And it says, does taking HRT increase the risk of yeast infections? I started HRT 5 weeks ago and I got my first yeast infection, which to me is like, I've had so many. Is there a way to balance this out? Is a yeast infection proof that a moist environment has been created by the hormones?
A yeast infection in the vagina, good question.
Mm-hmm.
A yeast infection in the vagina is not a normal thing. And it's also not the most deleterious diagnosis on the planet Earth. It's a hassle. We live with yeast all the time. They're all over us. They're inside of our gut. And no big problem. If they're overgrowing, you want to ask why. Now, a young woman who's in her 20s has got a maximum amount of hormones she's ever going to have. She's going to have the maximum amount of vaginal moisture she'll ever have. And she doesn't, it's not a normal state to have a yeast infection. Something's had to happen to get the yeast infection. So you always want to go towards hormonal balance. And if the increased moisture brings out a yeast infection, it isn't because the repairing and the healing of the vagina and thus the moisture of the vagina caused the yeast infection. No, it just brought it out into the open. So you want to look at the other moving parts. And it can take us into the broad world of holistic medicine, really. I mean, I had the great privilege of knowing and speaking to a medical doctor who was the world authority on yeast. And you got to realize that yeast's favorite home is in the intestinal tract, where it's more warm and moist and there's a lot of food. Next favorite home, the vagina, where it's warm and moist. Not a lot of food there, but there's some. And again, a woman who has a yeast infection, we want to look first at, does she have an intestinal tract yeast infection? Does she have a yeast infection in her colon? And what Dr. Crook, William Crook from Tennessee, taught us was, I asked him this once. I said, Dr. Crook, you've been doing this for 50 years of your life. What works with these yeast infections? He said to me this. I can picture him. He was a tall, white-haired gentleman really wonderful to run across a gentleman.
Yes.
Southern gentlemen's, when they're real, they're really something.
No, it's a high compliment to be called a gentleman.
Yes, it is. And it's really such a pleasure and an honor to encounter one, and especially the genuine ones. And he was one. And he said, and when I asked him, well, after all these years, what works to eradicate yeast? And he says, number one, don't feed them.
Yeah, right.
Number two, don't feed them. Number three, don't feed them. And what do they like? They're very simple critters, single-celled things. They need simple food, and they thrive on sweets and simple carbohydrates. If it's sweet, it's simple, and they love it. And so very often people are pushing yeast infections around. Think of how close the vagina is to the anus.
That makes me think of UTIs, though, not yeast so much.
Oh, well, no, but you also want to think of yeast. It's one of the reasons why vaginal. What's the source of vaginal yeast infection? It's usually not the vagina. The original source was usually the yeast in the colon.
Right.
So there's things you can do to eradicate the yeast. And another thing that relates to a healthy vagina is its actual acidity. Yeast don't like body acidity. So sometimes the vagina doesn't have that acidity, and you can restore that acidity with Lactobacillus acidophilus. It's an intestinal flora. It's a beneficial bacteria. And you can do douches with at night and leave the acidophilus. Just get your wonderful acidophilus, crush it up, or open up a capsule and put it in some water, and use a rectal syringe or some kind of syringe to squirt it up in your vagina when you go to sleep, when you're recumbent, when you're lying down. And that's approaches to it. There's also, sometimes you got to get rid of the yeast. Sometimes my favorite is nystatin when it works. Yeah, as far as medication goes, there's all kinds of herbs that the yeast does not like, and will get rid of so it's a wonderful area for herbal medicine.
God, nystatin, I haven't heard that in a long time. I guess I haven't had to use it in a long time.
Yeah.
Good thing.
I like it. It's safe. It doesn't absorb into the woman's body. So even when you swallow it by mouth, it's anti-yeast. Nystatin, New York State. That's where that came from.
Nystatin.
It was developed in Upper New York State in the university there. So here's the deal. It's not hard to eradicate a yeast infection, and you don't want to say that it's caused by the hormones, because a vagina that doesn't have sufficient hormones is especially vulnerable to illnesses. And if it comes out because you restored the hormones, don't give up on the hormones. Figure out what the source of that yeast is and do what you need to do. There's many simple over-the-counter anti-yeast medicines that you can put in your vagina as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeast infections, it's a big deal, and they're very uncomfortable and they're yucky. But thank you for your answer. I've got questions here, and I've got one question here that I want to ask you, and we have a few minutes left. So this one is, what is the difference between T3? I don't know if you want to answer this, but I'll go on with the question. What's the difference between T3 and reverse T3? Is it possible that if someone is given more T3, she could actually, at least for a little bit, feel better? However, symptoms did return. The doctor felt that I absorbed a lot of estrogen due to the weight loss I experienced from the T3, because that estrogen was stored up in my adipose tissue, hence my feeling better. And this is the real question, is it possible for estrogen to be released that quickly, like in 2 days, allowing someone to notice such a difference?
Well, your doctor has firsthand connection with the full story, and may have the experience and knowledge to be giving you a decent explanation. As I stretch my mind, I can imagine such a thing. In a few days, unlikely. But let me just give you a little background to thyroid hormone and T3 and reverse T3. Our thyroid gland produces this astounding hormone family called thyroid. And my God, it's so deeply embedded in things that really matter to us, such as energy production. Yeah, people who get a low thyroid get low energy, and then nothing works right. And low thyroid is very common for a lot of reasons. I mean, we overtax our thyroid glands, and it's extremely common. It used to be far more common when iodine deficiency was rampant, because thyroid hormone is made out of iodine and some amino acids.
Right.
And the principal output, hormone-wise, of the thyroid gland, there's two of them. One of them is called T4 or thyroxine. The other one is called T3 or liothyronine. And the major output is the T4, and the T4 is circulated to the cells, and the T4 goes into the cells and is converted to T3, and T3 is usually the most active of the thyroid hormones. So there's a lot of moving parts there, like there is in lots of things. And a certain number of people, they get clinically hypothyroid, which means if they do the standard thyroid blood test, they don't show up as massively pathologically hypothyroid, which in the old days, that was the only criteria the doctors went by. Not the practical ones, not the savvy doctors. They noticed that, yeah, people could have some minor alterations or moderate alterations in those thyroid test numbers. And even more important than that, they can have a story, the symptoms, because if you start getting low on thyroid hormone, nothing works right. So you get constipated, you get dry skin, you get tired, you wake up tired, as I mentioned in the beginning of this talk today. There's so many symptoms and so many physical signs related to low thyroid. I had the privilege as a senior medical student in 1968 to do an externship 3 months with Joseph Matavinovich, a world thyroid. I know that name is meaningless to you, but I'm repeating it because I have such love and reverence for Yugoslav talk about gentlemen. Oh my God, when you meet a man that's got a moral background, an integrity background, it's awesome to be.
I know.
It's like for a man encountering the divine feminine in a woman.
Yeah.
So I remember Dr. Matavinovich, I'm sure he's long since passed away. And he was, back in that day, we didn't have any of these thyroid tests. We were testing protein-bound iodine. But he says, one thing about thyroid is it's got so many signs and symptoms that you do not need any testing. You just need to know how to take a good history and a good physical. And in the questionnaire that we use, we really ferret out symptoms of hypothyroidism. And there's a certain number of people that they've got normal thyroid blood tests. They're not normal looking to me, but they're functionally hypothyroid. They just don't have enough juice. They just don't have enough thyroid juice. And there's ways that we assess that, and then we restore, we treat them. And we usually treat them with something like bioidentical T4, the major hormone put out by their thyroid gland. But a certain percentage of those people don't do that conversion from T4 to T3 well. And they need to also take T3. So yesterday I wrote a prescription for a patient of mine that I gave her a dose of T4 plus a dose of T3. And we effort, much like we do with the ovarian hormones, to individualize and find the optimal dose and eventually confirm by testing.
Got it.
Now I want to get down to that word reverse T3.
Yeah.
The body has so many protective mechanisms. It's just so astounding. And if there's too much thyroid hormone floating around, the body doesn't like too much thyroid hormone. It's too powerful. So it wants to dismantle some of that. So it biochemically alters the active thyroid hormone and turns it into an inactive thyroid hormone. What the heck? How does it do that? It does it. And that's what reverse T3 is. It's a deactivated thyroid hormone. So we're looking for reverse T3. That's part of the panel. I want everyone who is concerned about this to remember these 4 thyroid blood tests minimum: TSH, free T3, free T4, and reverse T3. And when we get an initial reverse T3, where do we run into elevated reverse T3s? When there is overdosing. When someone's being treated with thyroid hormone and they're getting overdosed. So what does their body do? It dismantles, it chemically alters some of their overdose. We see it also in a hyperthyroid situation called Graves' disease, but that's pretty rare, and I'm not going to go into that. The most common place we see elevated reverse T3 is when someone's getting overdosed. Now, thyroid, like so many of these hormones, is not subtle. That means someone takes an overdose of thyroid, they feel it and they don't like it. They get overamped. They get too metabolic. They get too energetic.
Right.
Tremor. So when you hold out your hands, you actually see a tremor. And there's so many physical signs, and you feel tremulous. You get heart palpitations, racing of the heart. You can get, you can get so many different symptoms, and we can confirm. I never have to rely on laboratory testing to pick up overdose, because women hate it. I feel like they had I didn't have 18 cups of coffee this morning, but I feel like I had 18.
If not other things, it's awful. You know, or in the, you know, we have a saying too that sluggish thyroid, you know, leads to sluggish everything by the same token on the other spectrum.
That's right. So at any rate, I wanted to just zero in on, because you mentioned the word reverse T3, and that is usually happening with overdose situations, but you shouldn't have to identify an overdose by doing a blood test. It should be pretty apparent. Your pulse goes up. I don't like to see a pulse above 84 in someone on thyroid. Some people have resting pulses who are athletic in their 40s and 50s. And so them, a 60 or 70 could be an elevated resting pulse. But 84 is a mark, it's an arbitrary line. I don't like to see a resting pulse go above 84, especially on someone who's doing thyroid, who's taking thyroid. So, yet again.
Yeah, I mean, there's a comment that says T3 makes my heart go insane, and another, you know, I have a problem.
Well, it's an overdose of T3.
Right.
That's what's happening.
Right.
You may not have needed T3 in the first place, but you might have. But you don't get heart palpitations or heart racing or rapid pulse from T3. You get it from an overdose.
That's right. And that, again, is where we have to be really proficient. And that's why it takes so many patients and people and good doctors that are training good doctors, and on and on and on and on and on, because menopause is a specialty. And there are a lot of moving parts, including T3, including estrogen, progesterone, DHEA combined with testosterone. And it can take time, you know. As we've discussed, at least for me, I was one of those I need rapid relief now types. I just didn't want to go on feeling like I was. But I, you know, now, God, I'm going into my 3rd year, which is amazing, much different, very grateful. So, you know, my famous medical saying that I learned from, I think, Hippocrates is hang in there. And you know that, you know, you quote me all the time.
Hang in there.
Hang in there. You know, we got to hang in there. I think it's a great thing to write on any prescription, don't you? All right. So
it's a hard stop for me today again. And so I'll look forward to our Thursday morning gathering.
Indeed. And, you know, ladies, I'm sorry if I didn't get to your questions. Write them to me. I've got a whole other notebook page filled with questions for Thursday, and I'm really glad everybody's here. Dr. Rosensweet, you're the best always for doing these. Always look forward to them. And We have a lot of women. I didn't get to the UK women, and I will have a lot of women in the UK writing.
We should have a UK day.
We need a UK day.
UK day.
We will have a UK day, and I will actually put that out there. UK day.
All righty.
All righty. So look, thank you. We're actually ending right on time. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Dr. Rosensweet. Thank you to my cats for not being like obnoxious. And for everybody, have an amazing, amazing day and a safe and very happy, well one. And you're welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. Hasta. See you later.
Let's see.